Dear friends, welcome to my video blog again. In this episode, I plan to do a book review. The book review that I am doing is of a book which is titled Dying to Serve: Militarism, Effect and Politics of Sacrifice in the Pakistani Army. It has been written by Maria Rashid, and I found this book to be a seminal work. Now, why I call this book seminal is the fact that we have reams of literature on this basic fact that why does Pakistani Army dominate Pakistan? But this is the first book which deals with how the Pakistani Army dominates Pakistan. The policies, programs, techniques, narratives that it seeks to create, through which it imposes this ideological hegemony over this nation, whereby the nation in a way has been in perpetual allegiance to the Pakistani armed forces. My main takeaway from this book are as follows. Number one, the commemorative events like the Martyrs' Day, the Yawm-e-Shuhada, which the Pakistani Army celebrates every year on April 30th, serves as an instrument, and a very important instrument, of enforcing this ideological hegemony amongst the people of Pakistan. Now, this is an event which is heavily choreographed, telecast live, and is managed by the ISPR. Maria actually analyzes these events in great detail to see how, through these instruments, the Pakistani Army creates this narrative where it projects itself as the final defender of Pakistan's as the final defender of Pakistan's ideological as well as physical frontiers. You know, these events are used to tug at the heartstrings of the nation, and through the tugging of these heartstrings, the nation is in a way indebted to the army. Now, analyzing the meta-narrative in this, what she found was that the basic theme which runs through these commemorative events, the Yawm-e-Shuhada, is basically the concept of rishta, the concept of relationship. Now, this relationship basically operates at two levels. One is the relationship between the armed forces and the soldiers and their families. And the second rishta is the rishta that operates between the Pakistani Army and the Pakistani nation in general. Like in 2011, the theme of the commemorative event was one force, one family, one nation. So this constant reinforcement of this rishta between me and you, which gives me strength and I am your defender, is constantly reiterated. You know, when the event is managed in a way where the people who, the martyrs' family, are so heavily tutored that they go there and create what is, say, creation of branding of martyrdom and creation of the authentic. Maria narrates an incident where, you know, the father of a martyr finally went to stage, said whatever he was told to say. He was very distraught earlier, but then he was heavily tutored. He finally, in a way, could control himself. He gave there, he just did the right, what was expected of him by the forces. And when he was coming down, he gave a thumbs up to the major in charge, who gave him a thumbs up back in return. So, you know, it is this level of preparation. Another thing which he highlights is the important role which the army accords to mothers in this commemorative events, because mothers are supposed to, you know, be the instruments through it. The heartstrings of the people can be tugged to a greater extent. Wives, there is a kind of, you know, because as a general said, you know, mother represents pure love, whereas a wife represents a kind of a romantic relationship which is not looked upon very nicely in an Islamic country. So mothers are projected in the forefront of during these commemorative events. And the other important aspect of this is management of grief. The family members are expected to grieve, but not to a certain extent where this grief becomes a source where it looks like weakness. So when a mother walks into the stage, you will have a backstage person conducting this event who would say, oh, the chief of the army staff would always introduce them as Azim Mai. And then you might have when she walks to the stage to give her testimony on what she feels, you might have the narrator behind narrating, Shahidon ki Mai roya nahi karti. The father would say things like, if I had 10 more children, I would give them readily to the army. So it is this kind of relationship that the army seeks to establish first with the audience, because the audience are supposed to grieve. Because from this, when the testimonies are given, the audience, feels sad. The tears are okay as far as the audience are concerned. And from the audience, through those camera angles, through those live telecasts, the relationship between the nation and the audience established to a certain extent, where the nation starts feeling grateful to the soldiers. It starts feeling grateful to the army. And the image of this self-sacrificing army is reinforced. There are incidents narrated, like there is this incident about a video poem being telecast on the screen, where the soldier is shown and the narrator asks the soldier, "Tum ye sab kaise kar lete ho?" And the soldier responds, and at the background you have all the war scenes. Then the soldier in his village with his family laughing away, and all the difficulties of flood, that which the Pakistani army manages. And the soldier responds, "I can do all this and take all the problems of the country on my head because I have the support of the army, my family, and the nation." So it is, the trust us, believe in us. We are the self-sacrificing people who are there, and as long as you support us, we are there for you. So this narrative, which is constantly sought to be reinforced, theaterized, and constantly told to the people, helps kind of creating this permanent allegiance that I talked about earlier between the people of Pakistan and the armed forces of Pakistan. Now, another interesting thing which Maria brings about in this book is how the Pakistani army treats what it calls its war-wounded people, WWPs. Now, these are people who actually make the Pakistani army uncomfortable, because the narrative that the army seeks to project is that of a macho, militaristic army who is there to protect, the image of a protector who can protect this nation. In a way, it is a very paternalistic concept as well. Now, when you see a war-wounded person, that war-wounded person is not someone who projects this image of a defender. He instead is a person who needs to be cared for and looked after. So it is this basic level of discomfort that the Pakistani army feels in projecting its WWPs to the people. Right up till 2012, they were not even a part of the Yom-e-Shuhada ceremony. In 2012, they were a part of basically the audience. And from 2014, they have kind of completely disappeared from the ceremonies. And like Maria says, military basically focuses too much on bodies. Bodies are things which have to be chiseled, fine-tuned, made machos, which can basically be demonstrated as complete through parades, through all their activities. Now the WWPs do not, so that when you have a body which is really chiseled like that of a commando, it creates a sense of awe and respect. But a war-wounded person is someone which you pity. So while the army does take care of them, it is not as if that it does not take care of them, but it pays them heavy compensation, it re-employs them, but it does not in such events where it has to project itself in front of the nation. These guys are relegated to the background. She makes an interesting narrative, when she was doing her research in the hospitals of Pakistan, she was denied permission to meet these people. And even journalists, researchers, they first have to go to ISPR basically to get their clearances before they can meet these WWPs. And a person or a military man accompanies them during these interviews. Before they are telecast or published, they are supposed to be again sent to the ISPR for vetting before it can be published or it can be shown on television. One major thing is, You know, for the dead, the Pakistani army appropriates the right to speak for the dead. But the problem again is with these WWPs, they are still alive. I mean, they can speak for themselves. Now these things plus this idea that they will invoke pity is another thing which makes Pakistani army pretty uncomfortable in projecting these people in the forefront during these commemorative events. Now third is the event of compensation. You know, Pakistani army has a very, very liberal compensation policy. There is a narrative with a father whose son got killed and he's still distraught in the book. But he says, Pakistani Fauj ne hame rupiyon se tol diya. But the point is, this is never discussed. Maria compares this with the compensation which the government of Pakistan started paying to people after it got into this war on terror. The compensations are given to general people. The compensations are also given to those serving in other instruments of the state, like the police and also the civil servants. And those compensations get publicity, those compensations are freely discussed. Whereas in the army or in the armed forces, the concept of compensation is not discussed at all. It is never brought into the public domain, as if it is completely irrelevant. And Maria argues that this is being done deliberately because of the simple fact that any attempt at any discussion of these compensation policies is looked upon in the armed forces as making the sacrifice transactional. And when you make a deal transactional, it is something which can be compensated. Now this goes against the very narrative of a martyrdom which basically cannot be compensated. That is the way the army would like to project itself before the nation. And for you to pay compensation to us, the armed forces, the compensation that you can pay is through your perpetual allegiance to us, because what we sacrificed for you cannot be compensated in any manner. She also highlights that is why Pakistani army is very conscious that any disputes among the next of kin about this compensation are handled very discreetly and by its own agency in the Pakistani army. The soldiers and their families are heavily discouraged from either discussing it in public or going to, say, a civil court to fight their problems. So they want to keep it within the family, not discuss compensation, when at the same time, for the other agencies, compensation is liberally discussed in Pakistan. Now, as far as paying the compensations are concerned, Pakistani army pays the compensation to basically the wives of the soldiers. But there is, Maria again talks about how there are problems, and when the wife is young, because there is a possibility that she might remarry, and in most of the cases, the compensations, there are instances in the books when as soon as they got the compensation, and also the land and things like that, the brothers walked in, it was distributed between the fathers, and in many cases, the wives have ended up marrying the younger brothers so that the compensation is kept within the family. Now again, what an interesting part is about the management of those martyred soldiers. Now Maria writes that she says that the Pakistani army does not fight only for the possession of soldiers' body, mind, heart, but also his ghost. So every attempt is made to manage the funeral so that it does not appear to be an arm or a regular funeral, but that of a martyr. So in this, an elaborate SOP has been devised as to who will inform the family. They try to see that the information is sent by them, not through the family members do not come to realize it through either the media reports or through friends or something. Then the entire sequence of how this funeral is to be carried out is choreographed, is given in the SOP. One important thing is that when the soldier's body is mutilated, or if he or she faces this problem of, where the body has severe bandages and things like that, then the family is not even allowed to see the bodies. The coffin is sealed, and there is this this narration, this incident in the book which he writes, where a mother, you know, when and again, let me tell you, these bodies are guarded by the soldiers of Pakistan before, if the funeral does not happen, if the burial does not happen on that day, but it happens, say, the next day. So the bodies are guarded so that, you know, the family members don't come. And so here is an incident of a mother whose son died in the Kargil war, and when he was brought home, and she got a chance to just see the coffin when the soldier guarding there had moved away. She opened it and saw the body and touched the body, which was heavily bandaged. Now, when you look at it in our civilization, you know, finally the closure is brought about when you actually see your dead or touch your dead. Management of the funeral is done to that extent so that the narrative is not destroyed. The family members are discouraged from grieving too loudly, because it should not appear as, you know, as a sign of weakness, or as a, so, and for this they get into touch not only with the families, but also with the local clerics there, so who help the family in managing these or this funeral. Elaborate SOPs, and she narrates the incident of where she had a videography. She saw the videography of one of those funerals of the martyr, and the mothers and how they are discouraged from crying. Vain is an important concept where, you know, they are professional mourners who mourn and sing songs for the soul. So those things are discouraged. The fathers when are given those elaborate caps and the nishan, and they are supposed to take it. The cleric constantly reiterates that he's a shaheed and he's still alive, so he does not need to be grieved about. So, and the mothers are told that, you know, because you are the mother of a shaheed, don't grieve too much. And at the same time, hinting as his compensation, say, look how much he's left for you. So if you look at it, the entire process of creating this ideological hegemony, every aspect is well thought through and acted upon by the Pakistani armed forces. Another very interesting thing which this book brings about is the role that Islam plays in the Pakistani armed forces. The instrumentalization of Islam, as well as the concept of shaheed and the problem that came up when Pakistan got into this war on terror and had to send its troops to the northwestern frontier province, and whereby very many local influential clerics as well as local influential leaders of the Jamaat-e-Islami said that the soldiers who are killed fighting the Taliban are not really martyrs. It is the Taliban who are the martyrs, and that created a lot of discomfort for the Pakistani army. Now, first, let me highlight what she talks about: Islamization of the Pakistani army. The interesting fact that this book brings about is the instrumentalization of Islam. I mean, it is not really Islamism per se. Pakistani army is not becoming a religiously Islamic army. So General Zia is credited to have brought about this Islamization in the forces. He instituted the Islam started getting taught in the education corps. He instituted this recruitment of the khatib, the cleric in the Pakistani army. Now, interestingly, he's a civilian. He's recruited by the army, but then he is subject to the same rules, regulations as an army man. I mean, he can be court-martialed. So this khatib now is a part of the regular Pakistani army, but the Islamic courses, the what you call the awareness and motivation course, which basically deals with Islam, is actually not taught by him. It is actually taught by the JCOs and the NCOs. He has no say actually in the course content. I didn't know this before I read this book. And so basically his role is reduced to that of a motivator, to a guy who can say Allahu Akbar and, you know, just enthuse the soldiers. What basically as Maria narrates in the book, the commanding officer says this, that we are not interested in teaching Islam as a religion. What we are interested in is instrumentalizing Islam to project a kind of nationalism which is defined by the Pakistani army, in which Islam helps us in defining this nationalism. So you are not going to So these classes are not there to make you a religious scholar. There is an interesting episode in the book where a major general actually asked the Khatib during the Kargil war to go to some unit and motivate their soldiers, and the Khatib retorted back saying, you know, certain concepts or certain requirements of jihad has not been fulfilled. So the guy blew his lid and he said, I'm going to court-martial you right now and do whatever is expected by me to do of you. So, and he forced the guy to move there and basically forced him to motivate his soldiers or whatever. So when Islam per se is not being, but it is also the use of Islam. So Pakistani army is basically instrumentalizing Islam towards the goal of a nationalism which is defined in the way it wants it to be defined. Secondly, we are coming to this problem of, you know, this fight against Taliban, where luckily Pakistani army did not see lots of desertations. Much of it had also to do with, you know, soldiers. They come from poor backgrounds that we'll discuss, as she has discussed in other chapters, which I'll mention. But, you know, for the people itself, I mean, during the course of her field work, she met a lot of people, and all of them were pretty upset about General Musharraf and about him fighting America's war, and he was fighting against real people who were defenders of Islam. But at the same time, when they were questioned that would they categorize those people who were killed in the battles as Shaheed, they had an interesting explanation. You know, the people from which, and we are talking about those areas, as I'll come to in the next chapter, or as she describes it in the next, in her separate chapter 2 and chapter 3 of from where the forces are drawn on. Much of these forces are drawn from the salt ranges area of northern Pakistan. Up till 2001, nearly 71% of the armed forces were basically drawn from this area. So these people have devised an interesting mechanism of, you know, resolving this dilemma, so as to say. So those soldiers who actually fight the traditional enemy, that is Hindu India, and die, are basically Ashal Shaheed. And these people who fight the Taliban or die are Shaheed, but they are basically Watan ke liye Shaheed. So there is a kind of a hierarchy between the Shaheeds. One is an Asal Shaheed, one is a Watan ke liye Shaheed. And this is the way they have resolved the dilemma. The other thing is the way they project themselves is, you know, these are innocent ladke. And what would they do? They don't understand too much. So when the army said fight, so they fought. Then, and the other argument given is, you know, army has strict discipline. What could these guys do? So they had to fight. So they fought. Now, if you look at the image of this macho defending, you know, this fighting for when that gets contradicted with Bacha Tha, it is a very different narrative, but that is the way I guess the soldiers have resolved this dilemma. The Asal Shaheed, and the Watan ke liye Shaheed, and still they are Shaheed. Now the other chapter, an important chapter which she iterates, is about this, you know, recruitment belt, so as to say, of Pakistan. Most of our research is done around Chakwal district, which is the part of the salt ranges. Now this has been a traditional ground of recruitment for the army right from the time of the Raj. Most of the soldiers, and there is this myth of a martial range which was created, and this North Punjab belt of Potahar region is actually, the soil is not very fertile. It's basically rain fed. Agricultural holdings are very small, so most of these guys move to the military. And so there is an institutional, I mean, the institutional culture has seeped into the area. Whereas very many people have argued that, you know, a Pakistani soldier, it is because of these villages, and 50% of the soldiers is already created by them. What her research teaches, it is not so. I mean, a lot of training, methodology, indoctrination goes behind the mind of these people, working on the mind of these people, you know, the training, the rigorous training that Pakistani army gives to its people. And make no mistake, despite all this talk that many of us Indians feel, I mean, I have had the experience of interacting with Pakistani army when I was with the UN. Extremely professional army. Let's make no mistake about it. Let's not underrate them at all. They are very professional. They know their job. The soldiers, they know the art of soldiering. And there is a massive effort and that goes into making of a soldier, which is done, as Maria says, in these training institutes. So in these training institutes, what she realizes is basically two things are done. One is, their older attachments are in a way broken down so that they get down to start loving their units, their platoons, their battalions. It is through them, like even in the Indian Army, basically if you ask a guy, he basically fights for honor, and that honor basically comes for his unit. And through these love, this new love, this new family, the army, which is created, kind of getting over the feminine attachments, getting over the so-called attachments from the village to your new family, your new thought process. So the change in the mindset, the army becomes the new family, the army's policy becomes his policy. This is being done in the military institutions of Pakistan. And when this new love develops for the unit, for the platoon, for the battalion, through them, he fights for the Pakistani nation. Now, but when she asked these people as to what was the prime motivator, why they went into the army, the answer more often than not was two things: gurbat, which is poverty, and pakki naukri, permanent job. So ultimately, much of this also boils down to, in a poor country, the job security as well as poverty if you do not join an institution like the army. In conclusion, I can say this is an excellent book that I read. Every Indian army, especially AGDPI, needs to read it. That is why if you look at it very objectively, in the battle of narratives, in the last so many instances, whether it was the last time post Pulwama, Balakot, in the battle of narratives, we have come out to be 19 rather than 20. Let's be fair. So there is a need to understand how much effort goes behind. I'm not saying that you need to manipulate the nation so much, but at the same time, effective communication forms an important ingredient of how a force projects its worldview. The Indian Army needs to learn from it. Thank you. In case you like my podcast, I'll again say, please give me a like, subscribe, press the bell icon. Thank you so much.